Once you understand what the founders were thinking about when they wrote the First Amendment, it is a lot easier to understand it and to see how so many people get it so wrong today. Hi, I'm Stuart Shepard, and this is First Liberty Live. Don't miss an episode of this program. If you go to firstlibertylive.com and click on the blue subscribe button, we'll send you a reminder every time a new episode comes out. That way you won't miss a thing. It's easy. Just click on that subscribe button, and we'll be in touch. Richard Turnbull is a senior fellow with us. First Liberty has something called the Center for Religion, Culture, and Democracy. And he's going to be speaking to some of the students we have here this summer over the next few days. And I wanted to give you a few highlights from his resume to explain why we wanted to talk to him about the things we're going to talk about today. Now, first, you have a degree in economics and accounting, and you started out your career as an accountant. And then you received a PhD in theology, University of Durham,
yep,
am I correct?
That's right.
And you were ordained into the ministry with the Church of England, which is what we're going to talk about here in a bit. You served in pastoral ministry for several years, and then for a time you even headed up the Evangelical College at Oxford, which I did not know there was an Evangelical College at Oxford, so I learned something new today. And currently he is the director for the Center for Enterprise Markets and Ethics. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Stuart. It's great to be with you.
Those are just the highlights. There's a lot more that you've done. You're an interesting person, and that's why I wanted to talk to you today. The First Amendment specifically forbids Congress from making any laws regarding the establishment of religion. And I suspect that a few of those founders were thinking about the Church of England when they were writing those words down. Help us understand what it is that makes the Church of England different from any denomination that we know about here in the States.
Sure. Stuart, it's great to be with you, and what a great question. And it's a good starting question, isn't it, about the First Amendment to the Constitution. That would be no church establishment.
Yeah.
And I think they were thinking of the Church of England, because the Church of England is what is called in the UK an established church. Well, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
Exactly, what does that mean? And the most important thing to say, it does not mean a state church. So the church does not receive any money from the state. The state is not allowed to interfere in the life of the church.
Okay.
And although the Prime Minister or the Queen officially announces the appointment of bishops, the protocols are that they can only announce the name that's supplied by the church.
Okay.
Well, that's one side of it. But there is another side. And it does mean that 26 of the bishops of the Church of England sit in our upper house. It's not quite like the Senate, but it's the nearest equivalent to the Senate. And
so in Parliament,
they're in Parliament.
As if they're part of what we would call Congress.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that means they can take part in political comment and debate. It's usually disastrous. I'm just describing the circumstances.
Politics is far more fun in the UK. We'll just establish that.
So, there's this idea of, speaking truth to power, this idea of contributing to the fabric of the nation. And I have mixed views about it. So there are parts of it that I absolutely accept is a positive.
Yeah.
But there are also negatives, and I suspect that's what your founding fathers were thinking about, the freedom, the liberty, and so on.
And the key here is, as an established church, competing churches are put at a real disadvantage, right?
That is definitely true. So, for example, if you are one of the 26 bishops of the Church of England sitting in the upper chamber, where are the Roman Catholics? Where are the Baptists? Where are the Presbyterians? Well, where are the Jewish representatives?
Yeah.
They're not there in that category. But of course, one of the reasons for that is just how different the Church of England is from many of the other denominations that we know. And the Church of England, for better, for worse, dominates the religious landscape in the UK. And it encompasses everybody from committed conservative evangelicals like myself, through to really people approaching Roman Catholicism, liberalism, and so on. Of course, you can see that's quite a
wide range of ideas.
That can be a complexity, as you can imagine. But the conservative evangelical group in the Church of England is quite strong. and has quite an influence.
So when the founders were writing about prohibiting the establishment of religion, they were not thinking about, say, a prayer over a loudspeaker at a football game or a high school senior sharing about her faith at graduation. That's not what they had in mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. They were just more concerned about that sort of independence from the state, that independence from the government, not the restrictions on the freedom to exercise your faith.
That First Liberty is a nonprofit law firm that exclusively does religious freedom cases. It's all we do in the U.S. So I want to get an idea from you what the challenges are like in the U.K.
Sure.
when it comes to religious freedom.
Sure.
Are you facing some of the same issues that we are?
We are indeed, and I'm not sure whether it's encouraging or worrying when one discovers that so many of the cases are very similar in the UK as in the US. I chair the board of an organisation called the Christian Institute, which really does similar sort of work in the UK to First Liberty here in the States. But what are the sorts of areas that are sort of coming up at the moment? Open air preaching is significant in the UK. So a preacher will stand in a downtown area and will begin to preach from the Bible. All too often the police just move that person on or arrest that person without any understanding of the law.
Wow.
And so we've had to fight cases to gain compensation and apologies from the police for doing that. Now, clearly, sometimes individuals in that situation are, then challenged by a member of the public. What does the Bible teach about, sexuality or divorce or abortion? And the faithful preacher will explain what the Bible teaches about those things. And again, a complaint is then made. The police, who rarely understand the principles that there is a freedom, it is not illegal to preach from the Bible in the United Kingdom, will then often intervene and the case has to be fought. So that's one group of cases. Let me give you one other group of cases, if I may. And that's sort of employment-related cases. And they vary from an individual who might wear a cross on their jacket and is fired from their workplace. Yeah. An individual, this is going back a few years, an individual put a palm cross on in their van, which was owned by the city council.
Okay.
And the council fired them from their job. People putting private messages on their own personal Facebook,
Sounds
their
familiar.
employer, does this sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah, which the employer says that contravenes, that constitutes hate crime, and so on. And we had a particularly prominent case recently where a employee, the chief executive of one of the largest grant-making trust in Scotland, was fired simply because the chair of the board disagreed with the position of the church he belonged to on matters of sexuality. And we won that case. And can I tell you about one more?
Oh, please do.
Because this is the most shocking case I've ever come across. It's going back probably 4 years now, but of such significance. We don't have a federal system in the UK. We have a unitary system. But in the last 50 years, there has been some move towards a federal system, which means that Scotland, for example, has its own government with certain responsibilities.
Right.
Maybe a bit like a state government here.
Okay.
And the Scottish government introduced what was known as the Named Persons Bill. Well,
it sounds innocent enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and their proposal was that every single child in Scotland would have a state-appointed named person.
Wow.
Exactly.
Okay.
A state-appointed guardian who would report on all matters relating to that child. A complete overthrowing of family life.
Holy cow. That's authoritarianism at the highest level.
It is absolutely scandalous. It was. In fact, it was so scandalous, we did manage to put a coalition of people together to oppose it, and we won the case. It was thrown out in the highest court in Scotland, in this instance, the highest court, which is called the Court of Session, as a completely infringement upon the liberty of the individual. And we received a cheque for the legal expenses And I enjoyed that moment. I mean, not a personal check, obviously, but, you know.
Why is religious freedom such a foundational idea for any free nation? Why does that have to be part of our founding ideas in order to operate as a free country?
Yeah. So religious freedom, political freedom, and economic freedom belong together. And if you interfere with any one of those freedoms, you are interfering with the very nature of the person that God has created. So when God created us in Genesis 1 and 2, Genesis 1:27, in terms of created in his own image, he gave us dignity and he gave us freedom. He placed the man in the Garden of Eden to work, to create, to innovate, and to combine all of those resources for the welfare and flourishing of the people. So if you interfere with the political freedom, if you interfere with their religious freedom to worship God, and if you interfere with economic freedom to prevent that person operating, you are preventing the flourishing of the people whom God has created in his own image. So you must fight. You can't just say one of those don't matter. They all matter.
And if you lose one, the others are not far behind.
Precisely. Absolutely.
This summer we have a group of students with us here at the building to attend something that we call the Shaftesbury Fellowship. It's part of the Center for Religion, Culture, and Democracy, which is a think tank, for lack of a better word, part of First Liberty Institute. That's what you'll be speaking at. It's an opportunity for these young people to learn about the intersection of religion, culture, and democracy. What will you be telling them?
Yeah, well,
what are you going to be sharing with them?
I'm going to be sharing with them about a significant figure in English history called Lord Shaftesbury.
Who happens to be right over your shoulder.
Who happens to be right over my shoulder.
Because you wrote a biography about him.
But probably most of your viewers have never heard of. And yet they will have heard, I guess, mostly, of William Wilberforce.
There was a famous movie a few years back that helped us out with that.
And Shaftesbury really comes immediately after Wilberforce. But he's actually a more deeply significant figure in the history of evangelical history in England.
What do we need to know about him?
Yeah, well, what do you need to know is he was in Parliament for 60 years, through almost all of his life. He was passionate about voluntary Christian education. He was passionate about the teaching of the Bible. He was passionate about wanting to improve the conditions of society, with churches and Christians collaborating together in order to bring about, to found schools, to found employment, and so on. And yes, he also, sponsored legislation to protect the weakest and the most vulnerable. But the interesting thing is he understood the limits of government. So he said, yeah, there's a role, but there are limits to that. Can I tell you one story about him?
I'd love to hear it.
So he went in the mid-1860s into... it wasn't the 1860s, it was 1848. I'd got my year wrong. 1848, he was taken by a London city missionary who was someone who was employed to take the gospel to the poorest people in London. And he took, you can see the picture. He looks like an English lord, doesn't he?
He does.
He took this English lord into the depths of the deepest slum in London.
Wow.
20,000 people. Criminality, immorality, poverty, everything was there. And this city missionary called Thomas Jackson had gathered together nearly 400 of the worst criminals in London. And Lord Shaftesbury met with them. He did two things. He preached the gospel, and he established and founded schemes of self-help, training, emigration, all sorts of things, in order to help them lift themselves to a better life. The two things: preach the gospel and provide the opportunity for self-help, self-betterment, self-improvement.
My understanding is he also did a lot to move children out of basically slave labor into education, right?
Absolutely, and his passion for children was one of the key characteristics and features, and children were sent up chimneys to clean them as young as 4 or 5, and many died. They got stuck, they were ill-treated. Children were sent down the mines to work at the age of 7, 8, 9. And Shaftesbury said, you can't do this in a Christian country. You can't do this. Is satanic. Those are the words he used. And so he campaigned over 30 years for the prevention of those evils.
And this brings together the thought of someone who's in the political sphere who clearly is a politician. I mean, he's in Parliament for 6 decades.
Yeah.
But he also brings in Christian ideology to influence the politics. What's the right way to put those two things together?
Yeah, so he was converted in 1825, very soon after he entered Parliament, became a committed evangelical, committed, yes, to the Church of England, but also to working with all sorts of, other evangelicals from other Christian traditions,
Yeah.
and so on. And he saw no contradiction between his faith and his responsibilities in public office. And his view was we need to challenge the evils that we see in our nation. We need to stand for our Christian convictions. He was a very close friend of Charles Spurgeon, the great sort of Baptist preacher in London at the 19th century. And I'll tell you this story. I found this letter when I was doing my research for this book, an original letter that had never been found before. And it was a letter from Spurgeon. It was an exchange of correspondence between Spurgeon and Shaftesbury. And Spurgeon was 50 in 1885. It was the year that Shaftesbury died. He wrote to Shaftesbury saying, I want you to come and preside over my birthday celebrations. Shaftesbury said, no, you don't want me. I'm too old. I'm getting to the end of my life. Spurgeon writes back, I want you. I want you in the chair for this celebration. And this is the words he used, because you, like me, are a representative of good old-fashioned evangelical doctrine. Wow. So, there's Shaftesbury.
He was someone then who saw a vital connection between public life and Christian thinking, brought them together, brought them to a country, and it brought good to the nation.
Absolutely. I couldn't have put it better myself. He saw no contradiction. Those things were not to be separated. It wasn't sort of, let's be pious on a Sunday, and on Monday, well, it doesn't really matter, we'll just go to the office.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to share before I let you go? I've really enjoyed the conversation.
It's been great to be with you, Stuart, and just really...
Thank you for saying my name right, by the way. Nobody ever says my name right. Say it again, let me hear it.
Yes, Stuart.
Oh, it's beautiful.
just my thanks and best wishes to both First Liberty and also all your viewers. And it would have been great to have talked longer, and I hope that your viewers have enjoyed our conversation.
I really appreciate your input. It's great chatting with you today. And to learn more about this Center for Religion, Culture, and Democracy, you can go to crcd.net. That's .net. We'll put a link to that in the text that goes along with this video to help you find it. We will see you next time right here on First Liberty Live.